California wine grape farmers are making the most devastating decision in agriculture. They are abandoning perfectly good vineyards and letting premium grapes rot in their fields because it costs more to harvest them than they're worth. We're not talking about diseased crops or frost-damaged vines. These are healthy, mature vineyards that have supplied America's wine industry for generations. Randy Baranek from Lodi said something that captures this perfectly. His family has farmed these hillsides for generations, and thousands of acres of vines have been removed in the last 2 years alone. A quarter of Lodi's production, gone. He said costs run between $3,000 and $4,500 an acre to farm wine grapes, but they can only sell them for a maximum of $3,000. The math doesn't work. California's 2024 grape crush dropped 24.1% from the previous year to 2.96 million tons. That's the lowest harvest in 2 decades. And it gets worse. Stuart Spencer, executive director of the Lodi Wine Grape Commission, expects production to fall by another 400,000 tons this year. Here's where it gets brutal. The losses are universal across every category. Red wine grape varieties crushed totaled 1.47 million tons, down 25.7% from 2023. White wine varieties dropped 17.2% to 1.42 million tons. Raisin-type varieties plummeted 51.7%. Table varieties crashed 67.8%. There is not a single category showing growth. The average price for all grape varieties dropped to $1,009.60 per ton in 2024, down 2.9% from 2023. Red wine grapes averaged $1,335.93 per ton, down slightly, but white wine grapes fell through the floor to just $706.84 per ton, down 3.6%. In some regions, white grape prices dropped 4.8% to just $698.61 per ton. That barely covers picking costs for many growers. Even Napa Valley, the crown jewel of California wine country, is hemorrhaging. Grape growers Gary Ittig and Lisa Grawl slashed their Cabernet Sauvignon prices from $9,500 to $2,500 per ton. These aren't bulk grapes from the Central Valley. These are premium Napa Cabernet grapes that used to command 5 figures per ton. Now they're selling at 74% discounts, and they still can't find buyers. For the first time in 3 decades, Grawl hasn't been able to sell her coveted Cabernet grapes. Her existing winery contracts expired this year and weren't renewed. Jeff Bitter, president of Allied Grape Growers, said this crisis is worse than the Great Recession downturn of 2008. The California grape market is experiencing its worst cycle in modern history. The numbers are staggering. Tens of thousands of acres have been abandoned or left unharvested. Industry leaders estimate that 30,000 to 40,000 acres of vineyards have already been removed, but they're calling for another 50,000 acres to be torn out just to achieve market balance. That's nearly 9% of California's entire wine grape acreage that needs to disappear. The wine consumption collapse made everything worse. U.S. wine sales dropped 9.1% by the end of 2024, according to market research firm Gomberg Fredrickson. That's not a typo. Nearly 10% of the entire wine market vanished in a single year. This comes after 3 consecutive years of declining wine sales, with volume dropping 3% annually since 2021. The consumer shift is generational and permanent. Only 29% of Americans of legal drinking age now consume wine at least every 2 to 3 months, down from 34% just 2 years ago. That translates to 76 million adult wine consumers, 9 million fewer than in 2023. Baby boomers, who made up 32% of wine consumers in 2023, now account for just 26%. They're aging out of drinking, and younger generations aren't replacing them at anywhere near the same rate. Cyril Chapelet, CEO of Chapelet Winery in Napa Valley, summed up the crisis perfectly. He said the industry planted too many vineyards and is making more wine than can be sold. Changing consumer habits, increased health consciousness, and competition from alternative beverages like THC-infused drinks have all hit simultaneously. The economic impossibility is suffocating growers. Kevin Phillips converted one of his generations-old vineyards to an almond orchard because almond production costs just a quarter of what it costs to farm wine grapes. But here's the sick part. Even ripping out vines is prohibitively expensive. California's strict environmental regulations make it costly to convert a vineyard, prompting many farmers to simply abandon fields and let them go wild. The abandoned vineyards are creating a secondary crisis. Unmanaged vineyards become breeding grounds for pests and diseases. Bitter explained that pests like leafhoppers and diseases such as great powdery mildew spread from abandoned vineyards to neighboring properties that are still being actively farmed. Farmers with abandoned vineyards upwind from active farms are essentially poisoning their neighbors' operations. James Renton, owner of Harris Vineyards in the Lodi area, invested in labor and materials to farm 125 acres of Cabernet Sauvignon in Zinfandel last year. Nobody bought the grapes. He dumped them on the ground. All that work, all those costs, all that perfect fruit rotting where it fell. He tore out the Cabernet vineyard in December. A couple weeks later, he decided to take out the Zinfandel too. He kept waiting for somebody to offer him a contract, but there's no hope. The lending crisis is crushing what's left. Mike Ellis from Randolph County laid out the reality during a growers' meeting. He said it's not about his plan for next year anymore. It's about what the lenders will allow him to do. When you're borrowing $3 million to $5 million to put a crop in, the lenders dictate everything. And when they look at these numbers showing universal losses, they're saying no more. The community devastation is total. Lodi, where around 130 varieties of grapes are grown and which is known for its Zinfandels, has seen a quarter of its vineyard production disappear. Workers who have toiled in these vineyards for 10, 20, 30 years are watching their livelihoods evaporate. One worker who spent 10 years in Lodi's vineyards said there's no other talk on the streets except worry about the future. The shift to almonds is eliminating jobs. Almond harvest is largely automated, requiring far fewer workers than grape harvest. Phillips explained that while almonds cost just a quarter as much as grapes and have robust demand with straightforward sales, the human cost to the community is immense. Entire families who have worked harvests for generations are being told there's no work anymore. The process of abandoning your own vineyard is soul-crushing. You spent all spring preparing the soil and tying vines. You paid for fertilizer that costs 25% more than it did 5 years ago. You paid for labor, water, pest management, and canopy maintenance. You watched that vineyard all summer, pruning when needed, managing irrigation, monitoring for disease. Now it's ready to harvest, and you have to walk away from it. Some farmers are using disking equipment to destroy the vines where they stand. Others are letting grapes rot on the vine while the plants slowly die from neglect. Chardonnay vines that should be producing premium white wine grapes are being plowed under. Cabernet Sauvignon fields are left to wither. Zinfandel grapes, Lodi's signature variety, are rotting, unharvested. The actual destruction methods are horrifying to witness. Bulldozers have plowed through Lodi's wine country all winter, leveling vineyards and piling vines in mangled heaps on either side of Highway 99. Amy Blogg, executive director of the Lodi District Grape Growers Association, said there are significantly more pullouts than happen in a normal year. One grower said he's taking out more acres this winter than ever before. Another said the need to remove vines is greater and more urgent now than at any point in his or his parents' lifetime. The burning restrictions make it worse. Until recently, if a grower wanted a vineyard out, they pushed it over, piled it up, and burned it. New restrictions on agricultural burning in the 8-county San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District have made vine removal slower and more expensive. Aaron Lang, vice president of vineyard operations at Lang Twins Winery, removed 400 acres this winter and is still waiting on a contractor to tear out an old block of Cabernet Sauvignon. The wait is months long. He's spending money to spray condemned vineyards just to protect neighboring blocks from pests and disease. Money thrown down the drain on vines that are already dead. The entire agricultural infrastructure is collapsing. Stuart Spencer explained that the whole spectrum of contributors to the wine industry are struggling right now. This isn't just grape growers, it's everyone. After 3 decades of growth, in which California, Oregon, and Washington state built a domestic wine consumer base, the last 3 years have been catastrophic. California wineries imported nearly 30 million gallons of foreign bulk wine in 2024. Think about that. While California growers were advised to leave grapes on the vine and tear out thousands of acres to balance supply, the local state's grape buyers were actively sourcing bulk wine from abroad. Local growers are being pushed out of their own market by international imports while being told there's an oversupply domestically. The market correction is accelerating. Vineyard removal requests in the Lodi area have outstripped the capacity of contractors. Wet weather combined with burning restrictions have slowed efforts to tear out thousands of acres. The vineyards are coming out faster than contractors can handle them. This is a mass exodus happening in real time. The winery closures are spreading. Cyril Chapelet expects the U.S. wine industry to become more consolidated as smaller or less competitive operations.
He believes strong brands with close customer relationships and a commitment to quality will survive, but many won't make it. The crisis is selecting for only the largest players who can weather years of losses. Canada, the top export market for California wines, has become uncertain due to tariff threats. Trump threatened 200% tariffs on European wines, but the real problem isn't import competition. The problem is that domestic supply crashed 24% and there's still too much wine. Even with the smallest harvest in 20 years, growers are abandoning fruit in fields because nobody will buy it. Here's the impossible situation. The 2024 growing season was perfect. Steady weather, mostly void of problematic events like frost or smoke. Even with record-breaking heat across the state, it's shaping up to be a good vintage. The grapes are excellent quality. That's what makes this so devastating. Farmers grew perfect crops and still lost everything. Quality doesn't matter when there's no market. Yields don't matter when prices are below production costs. Success means nothing when the entire industry is oversupplied by millions of tons. Growers who lost crops to flooding in past years might actually be better off than growers with perfect harvests this year. At least the flooded farmers could claim insurance and walk away. The farmers with perfect fruit have to watch it rot while drowning in debt they can't repay, because the perfect grapes are worthless. You can grow the best wine grapes in American history and still go bankrupt. That's where California viticulture stands right now. This isn't a weather disaster or a market correction. This is the systematic collapse of California's wine grape industry. When farmers are forced to destroy perfect vineyards while there's demand for wine in the market but oversupply from imports, when generations-old family farms end not with drought or disease but with a calculator showing the math doesn't work, when 24% of the state's grape harvest disappears in 1 year and it's still not enough, something is fundamentally broken. And once these vineyards are gone, once this infrastructure collapses, once the workforce moves away, it's never coming back. You can't rebuild a century of wine-growing culture. You can't restart an agricultural economy once the suppliers close, the workers leave, and the knowledge dies with the generation that couldn't survive. California is watching its wine country die, not from pests or climate, but from economics that make growing premium grapes a guaranteed path to bankruptcy. Fields that supplied America's wine industry for over a century going silent, tens of thousands of acres abandoned, not because farmers failed, but because the market collapsed beneath them while they were producing the best fruits of their lives.